Hello. Hi guys, welcome to episode number 6 of New Falmouth. I am Ping Yao, and today we are doing, as promised, a bespoke power plant. Now, you're probably thinking, 20-minute episode on a power plant? How is that even possible? I mean, you could probably put down a power plant in about 5 seconds flat. There's lots and lots of power plants on the workshop. There's loads of assets out there to use, and yes, I could have done that. But I had a particular build in mind, one that I saw on Google Maps. There's a particular power plant in Halifax in Nova Scotia, and it's right on the side of the river. Very, very similar position to what you see here. And this area is pretty restricted. You've got a freeway on one side and a railway line as well, which means that this area of land here probably is a portion almost of reclaimed coastline here where the power plant is built on. And also power plants are often built on rivers or water so that they can use the water to cool the plant, and also to transport things like oil and coal. So this area is a ideal sort of spot, I think, to build a large power plant. And this is the other thing, this is quite a big build, and when you look at the size of this power plant, which is, you know, roughly to scale to what these sort of builds are, compared to the sort of vanilla power plant, which looks minute in comparison. And so yes, the reason I'm not going to be going for a workshop asset or a vanilla option is because I want this power plant very much tailored to the city, and also to challenge myself to try and build something like this, because this is probably the biggest build so far in the city. Maybe the swing bridge for the road was a little bit more complex, but certainly this is the biggest single build I've built. Now, first of all, what I'm doing is just leveling the ground here to make sure that everything sits there nicely. And these kind of little, I can't remember what they're called now, they're kind of like embankment rocks there that are just going into the edge of the land there. A lot of this is pretty much detailed with decals and stuff as usual, just the kind of default option of trying to achieve extra detail. And I'm also going for quite unusual sort of details like this, which is a kind of retaining wall section on the edge of the ground here, which again was very similar to what I saw on Google Maps, and I wanted to try and copy that. So, I could probably have done this a lot easier by using keys or embankments or something, but I wanted to do it this way. So yeah, a lot more work, a lot more effort as usual I'm doing with these sort of builds, but I think the end result was worth the extra work. So, talking about the power plant itself, this is it's going to be an oil run plant. Which in fact the one in Halifax was as well, I believe. And it seemed logical to build an oil plant here because I've got the oil depot kind of next door, or certainly very close by. It's on the water, and obviously it's easy to get the oil in. And also I've been doing a lot of the sort of detailing with the oil and pipes and stuff, so I'm kind of fairly familiar now with how all those sort of assets and details work. So it was a kind of natural continuation of what I've been doing for the oil depot. Translate that to the power plant. Now, what I'm doing here is adding these ploppable asphalt details in. And when you start doing this sort of work, it's always a little bit kind of like, is this actually going to look good? But I think the end result was all right. When you see it in the cinematics, all this sort of works and blends in quite nicely. But at this stage, I was slightly concerned because it looks a little bit disjointed. You've got all these various kind of like details and things going in. But I think you have to just trust in what you're doing. I had this in my head as to what it would look like. And yeah, you have to kind of just go with it, really. you can see here how the space is pretty restrictive. You've got the freeway here right up against this mountain, which is quite a steep kind of rock face, which I need to detail. Probably in a few episodes time I'll be working on that maybe. But yeah, I wanted to put some extra train tracks in, just some little kind of spur lines that will be able to supply oil wagons and things for the power plant itself, and also an access road here. So this is the main road that goes to the power station itself. So once these kind of like ground level details are in, then I could work out the position of where I want to put the main kind of turbine hall and the boiler house and everything like that. So here we go, adding in this I think this was some kind of warehouse or car factory or something, I can't quite remember, but it looked like, certainly looked quite similar to the one that I saw on Google Maps, the turbine hall there. The other thing about this build is it's made out of sort of three sort of separate elements. So you've got the boiler house section here, and this is a power plant of some kind. I can't remember which one. It might be a gas one, I don't know. But again, I'm kind of very much tailoring it to my own needs. I'm getting rid of the chimney and pretty heavily editing the base model in PO, just to get what I want, get what I want to do with it. So I'm making it there will be 3 stacks, so that basically there's 3 kind of like flues coming out the back. So there'll be 3 chimney stacks, and then positioning that in relation to the turbine hall. So you have your turbine hall, which is usually the lower building, and then the boilers are in these larger, taller structures adjacent to where the chimneys are. And generally how these stations seem to work is you have the kind of like the chimney and the sort of all the pipes and stuff out the back, and usually the turbine hall is a little bit less kind of cluttered with detail. So that's kind of what I was doing here, sort of adding a lot more detail at the back, and leaving the front of the station fairly kind of undetailed, I guess. The other thing is there's a little kind of sub building, particularly on the one I saw in Halifax. It had a building next to it, which I'm not sure what it was, some kind of storage building, or I don't know, switching station or something, part of the power station anyway. And I wanted to add some extra detail to this side of the power plant, just to kind of lift the whole build up a little bit, because otherwise you just end up with a great big building. So I realised I had to add quite a lot and gone pretty heavy on the detail on this side of the build. But once again, doing this little trick with all the pipes and just POing them and adding them in, it gets a little bit laborious after a while, just tweaking all these pipes. And I think probably from here on I'm not going to be doing so many of these type of builds, because I've done this now, I've done the oil depot. I can concentrate more, I think, on the actual city now. I think next episode I'll probably be starting to work on the city on the other side of the river, so I'll be getting into the kind of residential housing, commercial areas, things like that, just tentatively working out where those are going to be, I think, maybe. But yeah, so this is probably the last episode for a while where I'm going to be messing around with pipes, I call it. And it is a lot of messing about. You can see here it's a lot of little kind of fine adjustments, and you won't really notice a lot of this stuff. I mean, it just disappears into the background, but I do think it helps if you can to add these sort of details in. The other thing I was doing was adding sort of, this is a decal onto the side of the building, because it is quite a big block that, so I wanted to break up with some little kind of details here and there. So I just put these kind of grills on just to make it visually look like there's something, something there. But I think it just helps to break it up and also makes it a little bit more individual. About halfway through the build, I kind of was starting to lose motivation again, which is always a danger when you're doing these big jobs. And sometimes best just to take a little break for a day or two, just to sort of get a bit of fresh perspective on it, and then go back to it. And it was fine, but it's always quite a challenge, I think, when you're doing one big job like this, particularly because if I wanted to, I could just get a power plant off the workshop and do it like that, rather than having to go full on bespoke. But hey ho, here we go. Anyway, so this is some more sort of details going in here. I think I don't actually know what that asset is, but it's a kind of doing a little job as being a support for these pipes and things. I mean just making up all these sort of details, really. There's nothing here that it just looks like it does something. I don't know what these things do. I think this was something from an oil asset, or I just sort of turned it sideways and planted it in, and the end result looked fairly, it looked fairly realistic, let's say. So yeah, I'm going to shut up for a bit because I'm running out of things to say. So and let you just enjoy this little section before coming back to something a little bit more interesting for me to talk about. Okay, so one of the important things is when you're adding these different pipes and things in, you can change the colour of them. Particularly easy in PO to do that. Tone it down, which is what I tend to do with most of them, particularly some of those oil assets. They look quite bright when you first bring them in. So I do tend to tone them down a little bit. And it also brings out a lot of the texture, a lot of the contrast by doing that, and helps everything to sort of blend in together. Otherwise, if you have different kind of tones and different brightness levels to some of your assets, it can just look a bit unrealistic. It's quite nice to be able to do that now, so you can actually change. For example, this part here was first of all too big and also way too bright, but by changing the brightness, it actually brings out all of the detail. So yeah, if you can do that, then try it, because it does definitely help. And also these sort of like little catwalk areas, I try and change those. I think they're actually timber, like a timber deck, but I've been using those a lot for kind of making visually look like there's little kind of gangways and catwalks and things. So this is the main kind of this sub building that sits next to the power plant, and again I'm using some kind of depot or something, warehouse, but again converting that to PO and editing that as well, because once again I just wanted to just tweak it slightly, make it a little bit taller. And on the other side here, so this is the opposite side of the station, there is the main kind of oil storage area. So as if I hadn't already done enough of these oil tank builds, I found myself having to do another one on this side, because the one in particular that I was looking at had this kind of this area next to it, and it makes sense. This is where they're obviously storing all their oil, and which again is piped into the power plant to provide all the electricity. And then these little oil wagons here, just putting these down next to the road on the front of the station. But I quite like the way it's sort of wedged in between the river there, and you've got the highway and the railway line there, which is a bit of a challenge to get everything to fit in. And what I'm doing here is I've got a lot of these little handmade asset edited created things that I've made. Like, they're actually using parks, so I worked on parks and then put lots of decals and details in. And what that means is you can add a lot of little decals and props and things, and it doesn't really affect your prop limit. This was something I was working on a lot on my previous city, Santa Caprizia, and I do find this is a really good way to go because you can get a lot of extra detail in. It's very quick because it's all, you know, pre-made, and also it doesn't affect your prop limit, and it's really good for these kind of industrial areas because you can get a lot of these kind of grimy, dirty areas with all sort of bins and trash heaps and everything else in. Now this part here is the kind of substation area where the electricity leaves the power plant. Now the one I was looking at had something very similar, and I think it's because it's so wedged in, it's hemmed in on this site. It's quite tricky to get your kind of transmission towers and things in. So what it had is a kind of bridge structure that crossed over the highway, which is what I'm doing here, which I'm guessing had all the kind of high voltage cables and so forth. And then the substation itself, the other side of the highway. So there's an area which you won't really see me building, to be honest, because it's not very interesting. But that's where the substation is, and then from there you then have your transmission towers and transmission lines leaving that, rather than leaving the power plant itself. So it's slightly unusual, but it was actually something that I did see on this particular one I used for inspiration, so I thought I'd do a similar thing. Now, the last part of the build, really, this is the doing the chimneys themselves. So this is where the whole thing kind of just comes to life now once you add those chimneys in. The chimneys themselves, the way I went about constructing them, there are some chimneys on the workshop, but again I wanted to go full on bespoke here. So I put a sort of base model in first of all, and then I used these kind of concrete planter sections, PO'd them, and then I tweaked the top and the bottom just to get it to taper, which was quite tricky because you have to line it up very carefully at the bottom, raise it up, and then kind of reduce the width as you go up. But I think it was probably the best way I could do it, really. And then I could colour. You can see what I'm doing is I'm doing alternate colours, keeping some of them just white and the others I'm turning red. And it worked pretty well generally, and once I got to the top I sort of had to fine tune it a little bit more. Each segment didn't quite line up when I took out the sort of base model behind, but you'll see in a minute the end result actually looked pretty good. So that sort of way of building these chimneys I'm pretty pleased with. And the last part was just this kind of flue in the middle. So what you have with these stacks is a concrete stack, and then inside you often have a few different sort of metal flues inside where the actual steam and everything comes from. And then it's just a question of positioning them in there. So you've got these massive flues out the back of the power plant, and just a question of lining them up. But this is quite fun, putting these chimneys in. As I say, it really brings everything to life once you get those in. And really that's kind of the last part pretty much. Now, oh yes, and what I'm doing here is this is the actual vanilla power plant, oil power plant I think. And so this actually functions therefore as a power station, this build. But also I wanted to make it, just give it a little bit of kind of smoke and something coming out the top there. Just put the little chimneys in so they look like it, it looks like it's actually functioning, working. So that's a little trick you can do. You can use some of the assets there and just sort of camouflage them inside a build, so you get some of those kind of animations like smoke and stuff coming out the top. And the last part is just adding some lights in, really, just adding the some little floodlights and things in. Okay guys, well that's pretty much it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and as always, do hit the like button if you've enjoyed this video, and do subscribe if you haven't already. I shall see you in episode 7. Until then, bid you farewell, take care, and cheers for now.